Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the Slaking line. And Slaking is incredibly powerful, with stats that even rival legendaries. Unfortunately, it does come with a pretty big drawback, and that is it has the Truant ability, which only allows it to attack or use moves every other turn. So it is very susceptible to being taken down before it can really even throw out much damage. But luckily, we're talking about a legendary type Pokemon, right? Well, unfortunately, we're starting with Slakoth, who also has the Truant ability and only has 60 HP, 60 attack, 60 defense, 35 special attack, 35 special defense, and 30 speed. And through level up, it only gets normal and fighting type attacks. Now, luckily, it does have an expansive TM list, but a lot of these moves are found much later in the game, as well as a few of these aren't unlocked until it actually becomes Slaking, which isn't great, but there is one saving grace for this run, and that is Vigoroth, who does not have the Truant ability. But that also leads to the question of when will I actually evolve into Slaking, if I will evolve into Slaking at all, because it just seems like Vigoroth might be better despite having worse stats. But I've already made the decision that I will have to, at the very least, fight the final boss with Slaking, though I will probably evolve it sooner than that. Anyway, that's why there's a discrepancy in the level up learn set, because if I evolved it immediately from Vigoroth into Slaking, it would have the Slaking moveset, or I could keep it as a Vigoroth, which none of its moves are actually all that great, but Vigoroth itself is probably a better Pokemon, at least at that point in the game. But anyway, let's go and move on to our Slakoth in particular, who has a modest nature, which raises its special attack but lowers its attack, quite possibly the worst nature it could have gotten, but at least it'll help with some of those special moves doing a bit more damage. It gets the Truant ability, which of course only allows it to act every other turn, and according to Bulbapedia, it gets Scratch, Yawn, and Encore. Honestly, a decent starting set. But we're going to immediately add Seismic Toss to it because we want a reliable amount of damage whenever the Pokemon hit us with Growl. It just makes fights a little easier. And speaking of easier, I'm going to take this a little slower just because it is a weaker Pokemon. It might need that extra bit of care in order to effectively level up. So I decided to fight some of the trainers in Gattian Fort. And something I've realized is I go for Scratch here, and as you would expect, the Truant ability will have a next turn, but I decide to go for Call this turn to raise my accuracy. But even though I used a command, I'm still able to attack on the next turn, despite the fact that I did something the previous turn. So that could be useful if I need to raise accuracy for anything. Anyway, at level 13, Slakoth gets the move Slack Off, which heals half my health in a single turn, making it incredibly useful. But I do need to get rid of either Yawn or Encore. Eventually I decide Encore is probably not as useful, and with that I decide to finally fight the old man who leads with a Horsey and an Abra. And I guess it's been a little while, but the reason I show off this fight so often is just because it really shows how well a Pokemon is doing in the early game, because this is one of the tougher fights before we move on to the Power Rangers, and it just gives good context to see what their struggles are and whatnot. So in this case, because Horsey has a higher defense stat, I decide to go for Seismic Toss, which of course at level 15 isn't going to be a one-shot. And even though Shroomish also isn't that much of a threat, because it has the Effect Spore ability, it could put me to sleep, poison, or paralyze me, which all aren't great, but it's a risk I have to take. And at level 15, I do exactly half of Shroomish's health, meaning that I can efficiently take him down in only 2 turns. With the old man beaten, we move on to the Power Rangers, and I decide now's not the best time, and that's because we're only a couple levels away from getting to Vigoroth, which is just going to speed up this entire playthrough exponentially, and the boost in stats will be nice as well. But also, before we move on, it has the Vital Spirit ability, which prevents sleep. Could come in handy. But it has 80 HP, 80 attack, 80 defense, 55 special attack, 55 special defense, and 90 speed. So it is about 20 points stronger all around on every stat except for speed, where it has gone up 60 points, which makes it an actual threat against many of the Pokemon that would have picked it apart previously. Anyway, with the new evolution, I decide to finish off Mount Battle. I get Fury Swipes, which I teach over Yawn, But that really doesn't last too long, because once I get Water Pulse, I teach that over Fury Swipes, and then I go into the battle against Brown. And this is just because I have water type damage to deal with the Baltoy, and I don't think Hoot Hoot can really do much to me. Which, it really can't. I go for another Water Pulse to finish off the Baltoy. All that's left is that Hoot Hoot. And I go for Scratch, which nearly takes it down in a single hit. One more Scratch finishes it off, and we move inside the Cypher base. And oh, hello Naps, and hello Slakoth. Goodbye Slakoth, and have a good day Naps. Anyway, moving on to Lavrina, she leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly. I go for Scratch into the Beautifly, and it's not even doing half health. Love Disc hits a crit on Water Gun, and Thief is doing quite a bit to me as well. Seismic Toss is doing quite a bit more damage to the Beautifly, so I'll probably swap to that in the future. I go for Scratch into Roselia, which doesn't take it down either, and Seismic Toss really can't do much better, so I get hit by Leech Seed. And at this point, I need to just get rid of the Love Disc because I don't want the Leech Seed spreading to the Delcatty. So I decide to swap targets, but unfortunately it's already too late, and I get taken down pretty quickly. So I decide to go Bout to Mount Battle after a couple more attempts to get the move Slash to teach over Scratch, and with that I get a huge power increase, plus a few levels as well. I'm able to take down the Beautifly in a single hit, and also Roselia in a single hit, which is incredibly nice. Out comes the Delcatty, which absolutely does not go down to a single slash, but with its high crit rate, it could have gotten a crit there and taken it down in a single hit. Unfortunately it didn't. Go for another slash to finish it off, and then all that's left is the Love Disc, which of course goes down to a single slash, and we move on from Lavrina to the obligatory Mirror B. Well, how are you doing this fine day, you good sir, Mirror B? Well, it's always good to see you. Anyway, at the top of the ONVS building, I run into another Vigoroth. Hello, other Vigoroth. Goodbye, other Vigoroth. And I go to the Railgam Tower to pick up one of my two favorite TMs, Protect. And that's because I don't think Hidden Power is really all that useful in this run, and instead I'm going to pick up the move Blizzard and also Hyper Beam. But I won't be teaching those until I evolve into Slaking. Actually, speaking of, Vigoroth tries its first attempt at evolving into Slaking, which I reject and will reject for quite some time until I think the time is right. Anyway, I pick up the Swine up here for the Never Melt Ice item to raise Ice type damage by 10%, could come in handy, and I decide to pick up the Seal here for the Mystic Water to raise Water type damage by 10%. And the reason for that is specifically for the Snaddle battle. He leaves with a Quagsire and a Lantern. I go for Slash into Quagsire, which with a crit should take it down in a single hit. Unfortunately I don't get it, so a second crit is needed. And then out comes Lunatone, and this is the reason for the Mystic Water item. Unfortunately, because the battle that I caught Seal was just before this, I don't actually have it equipped. But this will tell me if I need that extra 10% in order to take it down in a single hit. However, it is very apparent that I need much more damage in order to take down Lunatone in a single hit, so it does get Shadow Sky up before I take it down on the following turn. Fruity Pebbles rain down, and Vigoroth is already getting quite low. Luckily, I do have Slack off, so I don't think I'm in that much danger. And honestly, I might just play it safe throughout this fight. Go for another Slack off here, now that I'm down to half health. And the Castform really isn't doing that much damage with Weather Balls, so I could take it down, because Lantern is doing more with Shockwave. But the only reason Castform is using Weather Ball in the first place is because the weather is up, so once it goes down there is a good chance it might swap to a different move. And knowing this, I decide to attack the Castform. Unfortunately, it does survive on just a sliver. I go for another Slack off, and unfortunately it goes for Water Pulse, getting a 10% confusion, which is incredibly unfortunate. And now I just need to hope that I don't get confused too often, because out comes his final Pokemon, which is Matang. Now luckily I haven't hit myself at all in confusion, and I actually snap out of it fairly quickly. So I don't need to worry about that. All I need to do is take down Matang quickly. I go for Water Pulse. It's not quite doing half, so it is going to be a 3-shot, an unfortunate crit. Now Confusion does also have a chance to confuse. Oh, that is terrible luck. Okay, well, as long as I keep using Slack off, I should stay relatively safe. I think they're not doing more than half health, and okay, well that was an unfortunate crit there. Okay, and I take myself down to half, and Lantern gets a critical hit, and Confusion takes me down to 13. As long as I don't hit myself, okay, I'm back up to 71. Shockwave's not doing that much, and Confusion gets another crit. Okay, well, I snap out of confusion, use Slack off, another shockwave, another confusion. Okay, no confusion this time. Go for Seismic Toss, which unfortunately Matang survives on just a sliver, so had I used 2 Seismic Tosses, I would have been fine. Finish it off. All that's left is Lantern. Takes me down to 7, and like a fool, I decide to go for Slash instead of healing, and lose. Okay, well that's unfortunate. Let's go in for round 2, and I forgot to drop off Seal. Darn it. Okay, attempt number 3. And honestly, I'm just going to skip to the end because it's very clear that I could have made it to the end. I got some incredibly bad luck and I still made it that far, so let's go and move on to the end of the battle. Now it's just the Lantern. Once again, I go for Slash, finish it off, and we move on from Snaddle. 3rd attempt, but that's definitely my fault. Anyway, I teach Ice Beam over Seismic Toss, and then much later go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. And on the first turn, Nuzleaf always goes for Fake Out unless it can't. So unfortunately, because I don't have Protect, I can't actually nullify that. I get hit by Spark, getting paralyzed immediately, so now I'm slower, get paralyzed on the first turn, and hit an Ice Beam, taking Electrode down very low. But it looks as though I am going to have to use Slash in this battle in order to take down Electrode in a single hit, which is very unfortunate because then I'm risking Electrode Static, which could also just paralyze me right off the bat as well. But first attempt didn't go so well. Go ahead and teach Protect over Water Pulse, and then I go into the battle once again, this time going for Protect right off the bat. And then I go for Slash into the Electrode, luckily not getting paralyzed. Out comes the Vileplume. Nuzleaf goes for Hyper Beam, not really doing any damage. Go for Ice Beam to take down the Vileplume in a single hit. Then out comes Whiscash. Now Whiscash is quite defensive, so hopefully Slash does more than half, which it does. And it hits a Hyper Beam, also not doing that much damage. Go for another Slash to finish it off, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Skarmory. And luckily Skarmory isn't all that specially defensive, so I go for Ice Beam, nearly taking it down in a single hit, despite Vigoroth not having that strong of a special attack stat. But a second one finishes it off, and then all that's left is Nuzleaf, who absolutely goes down to a single Ice Beam. And with that, we move on from Gonzap to the top of the pyramid, where I get the move Earthquake, which I'm actually going to teach over Protect, because I don't think I'm going to be using Protect for the rest of the run. Anyway, now moving on to Gorgon, and with the Earthquake TM, this should be a very easy fight. Go for Slash into Celio, taking it down to yellow health, and then I go for Earthquake, which takes down the Lairon and finishes off the Celio, bringing out his Slowking and Ursaring. Now, I do know that Ursaring isn't a one-shot with Earthquake, because right before this fight, you had to fight another trainer with an Ursaring that's only a couple levels lower, and it wasn't able to one-shot it either. So, Ursaring is going to be a sticking point with Brick Break that does quite a bit of damage. I go for another Earthquake, getting a crit on Primeape, which I think was necessary for taking it down in a single hit, finishing off the Ursaring, and then brings out the Hypno, which another Earthquake takes it down to half. And its Shadow Storm does quite a bit to me, but not enough, and Earthquake finishes it off. So with that, we move into the final area of the game, and despite the slow start, these two are actually doing quite well so far. However, I do foresee that that might start slowing down very soon, because slacking is on the horizon. But anyway, we move into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I go for Earthquake, which doesn't quite take down either of them, so I do get hit by Attract and an Ice Beam, which, of course, I get an unlucky freeze, but a quick defrost. And despite the infatuation, I'm able to land another Earthquake and take them both down. Then comes out the Farfetch'd and Roselia, and of course between the two of them, Farfetch'd is definitely the bigger threat because Roselia is really only going to set up Leech Seed, which at this point of the game isn't nearly as threatening as it once was. I go for Ice Beam into the Altaria, taking it down in a single hit, and then all that's left is Roselia, which of course I forgot had Attract, but of course one Ice Beam should finish it off as well, which Lavrina goes down, and we move on to Snaddle at the top of the mountain. He leads with a Quagsire and a Matang. I go for Slash into the Quagsire, once again only doing half, just as before. Mudshot unfortunately hits lowering my speed, so I go for Earthquake, which takes down the Matang, finishes off the Quagsire, and then out comes the Scizor and Solrock. Now I do need to get rid of Solrock as quick as I can, so I go for Ice Beam and misclick, hitting the Scizor instead. Okay, well that's very unfortunate. It doesn't do that much damage to Scizor either. Okay, well, Shadow Sky is now up. Go for Ice Beam, and it's not even close to one-shotting Soul Rock. Okay, Steel Wing comes out, not doing that much damage, but between the Fruity Pebbles and everything else, I'm not healing anymore, and I'm taking quite a bit of damage. Steel Wing takes me down to 25. Fruity Pebbles bring me down to 14. I go for Slakoth, hoping to start getting rid of some of that damage, and unfortunately taken right down to 50. So if I get crit at any point, I'm basically lost. Flamethrower luckily doesn't get a burn. Steel Wing doesn't raise its defense. Okay, well with that I go for Earthquake, finishing off Scizor, doing quite a bit to cast form. Then out comes the Shadow Starmie, which might outspeed me because of that first Mud Shot. It does. Shadow Storm hits, taking me down to 25. Go for Earthquake, but that's not quite enough to finish off Starmie. And it outspeeds and takes me down. Okay, so with that I decide to make the decision now to evolve into Slaking, which can definitely make or break the end depending on whether or not it's as good as I think it could be. So with that, we move on to its stats. It has a staggering 150 HP, 160 attack, 100 defense, 95 special attack, 65 special defense, and 100 speed. So it is incredibly fast, incredibly strong, and can survive hits on the physical side very well, and can attack pretty hard on the special side. Its only real flaw is that its special defense is pretty low, but with such a high HP stat, I hope it's not going to be an issue with all the strong special attackers at the end, but we will have to find out shortly. First things first, let's go ahead and teach Blizzard over Ice Beam, that way it has a solid spread move that it can do every other turn. And here is the move Hyper Beam, which is just going to do a ton of damage because it's both stab and just incredibly strong. So I go into the battle against Snaddle once again. I go for Earthquake on the first turn, which with the insane power boost destroys his first Pokemon. Then out comes Scizor and Soul Rock, and here's where I really want to see that damage up. Because I can call between turns, I can actually raise the accuracy of Blizzard up to a reasonable amount. I'm not sure if it's 100%, but it's certainly pretty good, and Soul Rock survives with half health. Okay, well that's not exactly what I wanted to see, but luckily Slaking is extremely tanky, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Once I'm able to attack again, I go for another Blizzard, finishing off the Soul Rock and bringing out Cast Form once again. And then down come the Fruity Pebbles, which actually deal quite a bit of damage now because my health is so high. Unfortunately I can't move this turn, and Flamethrower gets a crit. Silver Wind takes me down to 2 HP, which gets brought up to 19. I go for Slakoth, bringing me up to half health, and unless I get statused, I should be good. I'm up to 118, and I decide to just go ahead and play it safe. That is until I remember what happened last time I played it safe, so I decide to go for Earthquake anyway, taking down Scizor and Cast Form, and all that's left is the Starmie. Now, unfortunately, I can't attack this turn, but once I do, it's going to be in a world of hurt. I survive the Shadow Storm and finish it off with a Hyper Beam. Anyway, moving on to the battle against Ardos, he leads with a Swallow and Alakazam, and something I've realized now is that Blizzard isn't a great move to use as a starting move because of its 70% accuracy. It's not really great to have that liability. Now, I do doubt that Alakazam would have gone down to a single hit anyway, but still. Anyway, out comes the Kingdra, and I go for Earthquake, which, as I learned, doesn't quite one-shot Kingdra. It does take down the Alakazam, and then out comes Heracross, but I don't even get to see it before I go down. Okay, well let's go in again. This time I'm going to use Hyper Beam to take down the bird, and that's because I don't want to deal with such a low accuracy. Hyper Beam does still miss occasionally, but it's still better, and why couldn't I call that turn? And this is when I realized that Hyper Beam and Truant act a little funny with each other. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I really haven't used Hyper Beam, but I'm pretty sure you're still able to access your bag or switch Pokemon between the Hyper Beam turns, right? But in this case, it doesn't allow me to do anything in between turns. It just skips right to the action and shows that I'm loafing around, allowing the opponent to attack without me having anything to do. Anyway, that definitely changes things though for the original plan, because I thought I would have a bit more freedom in how I moved, Unfortunately, this doesn't allow me to raise accuracy in between turns, making Blizzard not as useful as I thought it'd be. But I can't exactly get rid of Blizzard because it's definitely better than basically anything else. So this left me in a bit of an uncomfortable spot, which eventually leads to attempt number 7 here. I forgot to record the Swallow going down, but I just went for Hyper Beam like I was doing before. And then on the following turn going for Earthquake and taking down Alakazam, because now with a few more levels I do actually take down the Kingdra in a single hit. Then out comes Heracross and Electabuzz. I go for Call just to raise the accuracy of Hyper Beam, just in case I need it for the final Snorlax. And then I go for Earthquake. Now luckily the Electabuzz did actually go for Shadow Half, allowing me to take down the Heracross in a single hit. And finally comes out his Shadow Snorlax, which now that I know I have perfect accuracy on Hyper Beam, I know I can take down Snorlax from half health, and probably even from full health. Anyway, with that, we move on to Gorgon. He leads with a Slaking and an Ursaring. I go for Hyper Beam on the first turn, taking down Slaking, which then brings out his Aggron. Ursaring hits a Brick Break, not really doing that much damage, and luckily Aggron misses. Go for Earthquake, which takes down Aggron in a single hit, and takes down Ursaring in a single hit, bringing out his first Shadow Pokemon, which is Poliwrath and Walrein. Now, Walrein does have the possibility of freezing me with Ice Beam, and Poliwrath always sets up Shadow Sky on the first turn, so now I won't be able to heal anymore. I go for Earthquake, which takes down Walrein in a single hit, but Poliwrath actually survives quite comfortably. Out comes Mr. Mime. It's a Shadow Storm that is boosted by the Fruity Pebbles raining down. And once again, Truant has put me in a bit of an awkward spot where I'm taking a ton of damage. In fact, I get taken down and there's nothing I can really do about it. Which is why this battle actually took 6 attempts. Surprisingly, I don't think I've had a Gorgon be this difficult in quite a while, but it really just comes down to those final 2 Pokemon. Now, I am a couple levels higher now because of all those attempts, but really it comes down to just a few HP difference between winning and losing. Now, the only real change that I made was the fact that Poliwrath is definitely a very big threat and I need to get rid of it as soon as possible. So instead of going for Earthquake like I did before, I decided to take it down with Hyper Beam, which is why I called to guarantee that it actually hits. And then, of course, Ice Beam is going to do quite a bit to me. But luckily, I only actually have to take 1 Shadow move that's boosted by the Storm instead of 2. So I do survive with just 20 HP remaining. And because I have Earthquake and I know Walrein goes down, I know for a fact Mr. Mime follows. So it did take quite a few attempts, but I'm glad I made it past Gorgon fairly quickly. Moving on to Eldest, he leads with a Ninjask and Manectric. I go for Earthquake on the first turn to get rid of the Manectric because it can set up Shadow Sky and make all the following Shadow Pokemon much stronger. Now, this does also put me in an awkward spot having only Blizzard because I am going to hit both the Salamence and the Ninjask. And Ninjask really doesn't threaten Slaking at all, so I'd rather keep it alive. But unfortunately, Blizzard does hit both, taking both of them down, which brings out his Flygon and Marowak. Now, Marowak is usually a very intimidating Pokemon, but I do think that Slaking's high physical bulk should allow it to survive a Shadow End had it hit. But in this case it doesn't, so I'm able to get past it very easily, taking them both down with Blizzard, and all that leaves is the Lapras, which, after a single turn of loafing around, I go for Hyper Beam and finish it off in a single hit. So a fairly easy Elvis after all the difficulty. Now, before going into the final battles, I run into another Slaking. Hello there, Slaking. Goodbye, other Slaking. Now moving on to the big box legendary, Shadowlugia. And honestly, I think this could be a little more difficult. Never mind, Hyper Beam is insanely powerful. Now moving on to the final battle against Greedwall, he leads with a Moltres and a Rhydon. I go for Hyper Beam into the Moltres immediately, taking it down in a single hit. And unfortunately, this does put me in that awkward spot again of Blizzard not being perfectly accurate for when I want to use it, so I decide to call here. But calling also acts as a turn, so the following turn will be a Truant turn, so I decide to call again. That should guarantee that Blizzard will always hit. And I go for Slakoth because now I've already taken a ton of damage. Unfortunately, that means that I am going to loaf around the next turn, but this following turn I will be able to use Blizzard unless I get crit by Rhydon. Okay, well, let's go ahead and use Slakoth again. It's fine, we have a ton of them, so it's not that big a deal. Okay, now, as long as I don't get crit again, I think I'm good. And they just really keep hitting, don't they? Hold on, maybe let's just go ahead and wait for a turn or two where they just don't hit. Okay, well, Rhydon missed, that's good. And he hits this turn, and Executor missed. Okay, I think that's a good enough set. I decided to switch over to Earthquake just to take them both down. It really doesn't matter which one I used, but I wanted to save on PP just in case I needed more blizzards. Anyway, with my attack lowered, Hyper Beam might not be the one-shot move that it was before, but it probably will still be anyway. I go for Hyper Beam, which with a crit absolutely takes down Articuno. Okay, well now that Articuno's gone, that brings out Zapdos. And honestly, this could be a very easy first try victory. I'm stuck loafing this turn, take quite a bit of damage from the Shadow Bolt. My goodness, that was a ton. Okay, well, as long as I don't decide to slack off this turn, and Blizzard isn't quite enough to finish either of them off, okay, well that's just very unfortunate. Now something I learned very quickly is that Articuno is a big threat, and that's because whenever you take down an opponent, the following turn is the Truant turn, allowing Articuno to hit a big Shadow Chill. Now the Shadow Chill really isn't the issue, it's the after effect with a 10% chance to freeze. And because Slaking wastes so many turns in between, it is more than likely going to get frozen on any given attempt. Now the other thing I realized is that Zapdos is a huge threat. Now we already saw some of its power in the first attempt, but it continues to be a very strong Pokemon throughout all of the attempts where I get to it. Which finally leads us to attempt number 10, which shockingly has the worst start of any of them, with me missing Hyper Beam right off the bat, getting hit by both the Moltres and Rhydon, not once but twice because I'm stuck loafing before I can even move. And unfortunately, because my health is so low, I have to make the decision to either heal or take down Moltres. In this case, I decide to take down Moltres because I think that's just better. Luckily, Rhydon does start to miss, and so does Executor. So that's great. I go for Earthquake to finish off Rhydon, deal a little bit of damage to Executor, then out comes Tauros. Now, despite what I've said about the legendary birds, this is actually the most frustrating part about this entire fight, and that's that I need to stall out all the turns of Shadow Sky, but also get the luck to actually continue the fight afterwards. So what do I actually mean by that? Well, Executor, it doesn't really matter if it hits the first or second round, because I'm just going to heal that damage off anyway, and I'm going to effectively be at full health or near full health right off the bat. So at this point, I'm up to full health. Executor unfortunately does hit, which isn't what I really want, but I'm still in a decent position as long as it doesn't hit again, which it does. So right off the bat, we have quite possibly the worst luck I could have had going into the final birds. But Tauros goes down, out comes Articuno, and I am going to have to take a Shadow Chill, which luckily does not freeze me. Executor misses again, go for Slakoth to get up to full health, another Shadow Chill, luckily doesn't freeze, and another miss from Executor. Loafing around, another Shadow Chill, no freeze, do get hit, unfortunately get crit, which is once again terrible luck. Out comes Zapdos. Now I am going to have to survive an attack from Zapdos, which I can do very well, but there's always that chance that I get hit by Executor, or it gets a crit, or I even get paralyzed by Zapdos, but a single Hyper Beam does take it down. Executor hits its last Shadow in, taking me down to 88, but I heal all the way up to 109 before finishing it off with one last Blizzard. So it's very obvious that this fight wasn't too bad for Slaking, but there were a lot of factors working against it, mostly stemming from the Truant ability. Now, of course, it has to deal with the usual just luck of Shadow End hitting, which I will say it got some terrible luck. It also has to deal with the fact that Hyper Beam isn't 100% accurate, which it felt in that final battle. It's always got to worry about status effects from all three legendary birds, especially if it misses that first move. And critical hits were flying around like crazy. And I think that's really the biggest issue, is that because it is so slow to actually take down its opponents, it really just leaves itself open to basically everything that could happen will happen. Which unfortunately puts it all the way down in the C tier, right behind Tropius. Now, I will say, this Pokemon line actually really did surprise me. Now, I know that Truant is truly terrible, and honestly, to find it in the C tier is not all that surprising. However, Slakoth did much better than I thought it would have performed. Vigoroth, as I expected, was the real MVP of the entire challenge, and Slaking, despite all of its issues, had a very satisfying run through the last few bosses of the game because of its immense power. Now, do I think it's good? Absolutely not. But to see it just completely destroy Lugia in a single Hyper Beam is magnificent. But with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!